There is a question that lives quietly in the human heart, appearing in moments of stillness or transition, in the space between sleep and waking, in the pause before a decision is made. It is not always spoken aloud, but it persists across cultures and centuries, woven into the fabric of our interior lives. This question is simple, yet it touches something profound. Why am I here? Not here in this room or this city or this moment, but here in existence itself. Why does consciousness arise? Why does it feel at times as though we are visitors in our own lives, as though some part of us remembers a place we have never been, a home we cannot name? This sense of displacement, of being a stranger in the world, is not unique to any single tradition or time. It appears in philosophy, in poetry, in the private journals of people who never expected to think such thoughts. It is the feeling that there is more to existence than what the senses reveal, that beneath the surface of everyday experience lies a deeper story, one that involves not just the body and its needs, but something else, something that might be called the soul. Throughout history, human beings have constructed narratives to address this feeling. They have built cosmologies, mythologies, theologies. They have imagined the universe as a sacred order, a fallen realm, a testing ground, a dream. And among these many visions, there is one that emerged in the early centuries of the Common Era, in the deserts and cities of the Roman Empire, among communities of people who were trying to understand the teachings of Jesus in light of their own experience and the intellectual currents of their time. This vision was preserved in a text that scholars today call the Apocryphon of John, or the Secret Book of John. It is a document that was not included in the New Testament, a text that was hidden for centuries, buried in the sands of Egypt and rediscovered only in the 20th century. It offers a detailed and imaginative account of the origin of the cosmos, the nature of the divine and the condition of the human soul. It addresses, directly and without hesitation, the question of why we are here, and it does so through a lens that is both mystical and philosophical, both personal and cosmic. The story it tells is not the story most people learn in Sunday school. It is strange, layered, and rich with symbolism. It speaks of realms beyond the physical, of divine beings and their emanations, of a creation that is both magnificent and flawed. It describes the human soul as something that does not truly belong to the material world, but has entered it through a series of cosmic events, and it suggests that the purpose of life is not simply to endure or to obey, but to remember, to awaken to a knowledge that was present before birth and that can be recovered through insight and inner work. This text is one expression of a broader movement that scholars call Gnosticism, a term derived from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. Gnostic communities flourished in the first few centuries after the life of Jesus, and they produced a wide variety of texts, each with its own emphasis and imagery. The Secret Book of John is one of the most complete and systematic of these writings. It was valued highly enough to be copied multiple times, and versions of it have been found in different locations, suggesting that it was read and discussed by communities scattered across the ancient world. To understand this text, and to grasp what it says about why the soul came to earth, it is necessary first to understand something of the world in which it was written. The early Christian movement was not a single, unified entity. In the decades and centuries following the life of Jesus, different groups interpreted his teachings in different ways. Some emphasized his role as the Jewish Messiah, others as a divine savior, still others as a teacher of hidden wisdom. These communities were shaped by the cultures in which they lived, by Greek philosophy, by Jewish mysticism, by Egyptian religion, by the Roman imperial context. They debated with one another, wrote letters and treatises, and produced a wide range of texts, some of which would later be gathered into the New Testament, and others of which would be excluded, forgotten, or actively suppressed. The texts that were excluded came to be called apocryphal or heretical, though these terms reflect the judgments of later authorities, not the self-understanding of the people who wrote and read them. For those early readers, these writings were sacred, revelatory, and true. They offered answers to questions that seemed urgent and unavoidable. What is the nature of God? What is the relationship between spirit and matter? Why is there suffering? What is the purpose of human existence? Among the texts that were not included in the New Testament were many that are now classified as Gnostic. These texts often claim to contain secret teachings, knowledge that Jesus had given to his closest disciples, but that was not meant for everyone. They described the universe in terms that were more dualistic than what would become Orthodox Christianity, depicting the material world not as the creation of a benevolent God, but as the work of a lesser ignorant deity. They spoke of the soul as divine in origin, trapped or exiled in the body, and in need of liberation through knowledge. For many centuries, these texts were known only through the writings of their opponents, church fathers who argued against them and quoted fragments in order to refute them. Then, in 945, near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a farmer digging for fertilizer uncovered a sealed jar containing 13 leather-bound codices, ancient books that had been buried sometime in the 4th century. These books contained more than 50 texts, most of them previously unknown. Among them were several versions of the secret Book of John. The discovery at Nag Hammadi revolutionized the study of early Christianity. It provided direct access to voices that had been silenced, and it revealed the diversity of thought and practice in the early Christian world. Scholars could now read Gnostic texts in their own words, rather than through the lens of their opponents. They could examine the mythology, the theology, the ethical teachings, and the spiritual practices that these communities valued. The secret Book of John is presented as a revelation given by the risen Jesus to his disciple John. It begins with John in a state of distress, troubled by questions about the nature of the Saviour, the origin of the cosmos, and the destiny of humanity. Jesus appears to him in a form that is both human and divine, and he begins to speak. What follows is not a simple moral teaching or a prophecy of the end times, but a detailed cosmology, a map of invisible realities, and an explanation of how the human soul came to be in the condition it now finds itself. The text opens with an account of the ultimate source, the One, the incomprehensible origin of all that exists. This source is described in language that is deliberately paradoxical. It is beyond being and non-being, beyond time and space, beyond any concept or image. It cannot be named or described in positive terms because it is not a thing among other things. It is the ground of all existence, the infinite depth from which everything arises. The text calls it the Father, but it is clear that this is not a father in any human sense. It is not a person, not a creator in the way that a craftsman makes an object. It is pure potentiality, the fullness that precedes all differentiation. From this source, the text explains, there emerges a series of divine emanations, beings of light and consciousness that are called eons. These aeons inhabit a realm called the pleroma, which means fullness or completeness. The pleroma is not a place in the physical sense, but a state of perfect unity and harmony, where all the divine powers exist in relation to one another without conflict or lack. It is a realm of pure thought, pure love, pure life. It is the true home of consciousness, the origin to which the soul ultimately belongs. The aeons are described as pairs, male and female, each representing a different aspect of the divine nature, mind and truth, word and life, and so on. They are not separate from the source, but expressions of it, ways in which the one unfolds into multiplicity without losing its unity. The pleroma is, in this sense, a vision of the divine life as dynamic, relational, and abundant, a fullness that eternally gives birth to itself without diminishing. Among the aeons is one called Sophia, which means wisdom. Sophia is described as having a desire to know the Father directly, without the mediation of her consort. This desire is not presented as sinful, but it is portrayed as premature, as an act that disrupts the harmony of the pleroma. Sophia wishes to create on her own, to bring forth something from herself alone, and in doing so she produces an offspring that is unlike the other eons. This offspring is called Yaldabaoth, and he is described as ignorant, arrogant, and flawed. Yaldabaoth does not know his own origin. He does not perceive the pleroma or the source from which Sophia came. He believes himself to be the only god, the supreme power. In his ignorance, he sets about creating a realm of his own, a world of matter and limitation. He fashions Archons, subordinate powers, and together they construct the physical cosmos, including the heavens, the earth, and the bodies that will house human souls. This cosmos is not the work of the true God according to the text, but the work of an ignorant demiurge, a craftsman who mistakes his own creation for ultimate reality. The text describes Yaldabaoth as declaring, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me," a statement that echoes the language of the Hebrew Bible, but is here presented as an act of ignorance and pride. The Archons, under Yaldabaoth's direction, shape the material world according to patterns they dimly perceive, imitating the forms of the pleroma without understanding them. They create a realm that is beautiful in its complexity, but also marked by limitation, decay, and death. It is a realm of forgetfulness, where the light of the divine is refracted, dimmed, and obscured. Yet the human being, according to the secret Book of John, is not simply a creation of the Archons. There is a crucial moment in the narrative when the divine realm intervenes. Sophia, regretting the consequences of her action, mourns and prays for correction. The source responds by sending a reflection of the divine image into the material realm. Yaldabaoth and the Archons, seeing this image, are amazed by its beauty and power. They decide to create a human being in imitation of it, hoping to capture that power for themselves. They fashion a body from the elements of the material world, but it lies lifeless, unable to move. The Archons cannot animate it, because they do not possess the life-giving power that comes from the true source. Then, through a divine deception, they are tricked into breathing spirit into the body. Yaldabaoth breathes into the human form, and in doing so he inadvertently transfers a portion of the divine light that he had received from Sophia. The human being comes alive, radiant and luminous, more powerful than the Archons themselves. This is the moment of the soul's entry into the material world. The soul in the Gnostic view is a fragment of the divine, a spark of light from the pleroma, now enclosed in a body made by ignorant powers. It is not that the soul chose to come to Earth in the sense of making a deliberate decision before birth. Rather, it came as part of a cosmic drama, a process set in motion by Sophia's passion and the demiurge's ignorance. The soul is, in a sense, a prisoner, but also a presence that carries within it the potential for awakening. The Archons, recognizing that they have lost some of their power to the human being, become fearful. They conspire to bind the soul more tightly to the body, to cloud its awareness, to make it forget its origin. They introduce sleep, a metaphor for unconsciousness and ignorance. They place the human being in a paradise, a controlled environment designed to keep the soul comfortable but unaware. They create desire, attachment, and distraction, all the conditions that will prevent the soul from remembering who it truly is. The text describes the Archons as also creating woman from man, as a further means of binding consciousness to the material realm through reproduction and the cycle of birth and death. This is not presented as a simple retelling of the Genesis story, but as a commentary on it, a reinterpretation that sees the Garden of Eden not as a gift from a benevolent creator, but as a trap set by ignorant powers. Yet even in this condition, the soul is not abandoned by the divine. The text speaks of a divine helper, a revealer of truth, who comes in various forms to awaken humanity. This figure is sometimes called the epinoia of light, the luminous thought, or the spiritual Eve. She is a feminine presence, an emissary from the pleroma, who works to undo the work of the Archons. She teaches the soul to remember, to question, to look beyond the surface of things. The story of the tree of knowledge is reinterpreted in this light. In the Genesis account, eating from the tree is an act of disobedience that brings death and suffering into the world. In the secret book of John, eating from the tree is an act of awakening. The serpent is not a tempter, but a teacher. The knowledge gained is not sinful, but liberating. It is the beginning of the soul's recognition that it does not belong to this world, that it has a higher origin and a greater destiny. Yaldabaoth, seeing that humanity has begun to awaken, becomes enraged. He punishes the Archons who failed to keep the human being ignorant, and he redoubles his efforts to bind the soul to the material realm. He establishes systems of law, morality, and religion that reinforce forgetfulness. He creates fate, the belief that human life is determined by forces beyond its control. He introduces suffering, sagacity, and conflict, all to keep the soul focused on survival and unable to lift its gaze toward the divine. But the soul, even in its forgetful state, retains a trace of its origin. This trace is what the Gnostics call the divine spark, or the seed of light. It is the part of the soul that cannot be fully extinguished, no matter how deeply it is buried under the layers of conditioning, desire, and fear. It is the source of the feeling that there is more to life than what appears, the intuition that prompts the question, why am I here? The secret book of John describes the human condition as one of exile. The soul is not at home in the material world, even though it may forget this fact for long periods. It wanders through life, experiencing pleasure and pain, success and failure, love and loss, all the while carrying within it a longing for something it cannot name. This longing is the memory of the pleroma, faint and distorted but persistent. It is the soul's deepest nature calling it back to itself. The text does not present this exile as pointless suffering. There is a purpose to the soul's journey through matter, though it is not the purpose assigned by the Archons. The soul comes to earth not because it deserves punishment, but because it is part of a process of healing and restoration. The imbalance created by Sophia's action is being corrected, and the soul's experience in the material world is part of that correction. Through its struggles and its encounters, the soul has the opportunity to develop knowledge, compassion, and strength. It learns to distinguish between what is real and what is illusory, between what nourishes and what depletes. The text describes the Saviour, the figure of Jesus, as the one who brings the final and complete revelation. He is sent from the Pleroma, not as a sacrifice to appease an angry God, but as a teacher and a guide. His role is to awaken the soul, to remind it of its true identity, and to show it the path back to the Pleroma. He does this not through fear or command, but through gnosis, the direct knowledge of the divine that arises when the soul recognizes itself in the light of truth. The Saviour reveals the structure of the cosmos, the nature of the Archons, and the methods they use to keep humanity in ignorance. He teaches that salvation is not a matter of belief or obedience, but of awareness. It is a shift in consciousness, a turning away from the false images of reality projected by the Archons, and a turning toward the inner light that has always been present. This is not an easy or instantaneous process. It requires courage, discernment, and perseverance. It requires the soul to question everything it has been taught, to examine its own desires and fears, and to face the reality of its condition without illusion. The secret book of John describes several stages in this process of awakening. First, the soul must recognize that it is asleep, that it has been living in a kind of dream. This recognition can be painful because it involves seeing how much of life has been spent in forgetfulness, in pursuit of things that do not satisfy. But this pain is also the beginning of freedom. It is the moment when the soul stops blaming external forces for its condition and takes responsibility for its own awareness. Next, the soul must learn to discern between the voices of the Archons and the voice of the divine. The Archons speak through the mind's habitual patterns, through the demands of the ego, through the fear of death and the craving for security. They speak in the language of must and should, of guilt and of shame, of comparison and competition. The divine speaks through the still, small voice of inner knowing, through the moments of clarity and peace, through the recognition of beauty and truth. Learning to listen to this voice is the work of a lifetime. The text also speaks of the need to overcome the passions, the turbulent emotions and desires that bind the soul to the material realm. This is not a denial of emotion or a flight from embodied life, but a transformation of relationship. The passions are not evil in themselves, but they become chains when the soul identifies with them completely, when it believes that happiness depends on their satisfaction. By observing the passions with detachment, the soul learns that it is not identical with them, that it has a center of awareness that is deeper and more stable. Throughout this process, the soul is guided by the light of gnosis, the knowledge that comes from direct experience rather than from belief or doctrine. This knowledge is not information about God, but the actual presence of the divine within consciousness. It is the recognition that the soul and the source are not separate, that the spark of light within the human being is of the same nature as the infinite light of the Pleroma. This recognition does not come from reading or reasoning alone, though these can prepare the way. It comes from a kind of seeing, an opening of the inner eye, a moment of grace in which the veil is lifted and the soul knows itself as it truly is. The secret book of John presents this awakening as both individual and collective. Each soul must walk its own path, must do its own work of remembering, but the souls are not isolated from one another. They are part of a larger whole, the scattered fragments of Sophia's light, and as each one awakens, it contributes to the restoration of the Pleroma. The text suggests that when enough souls have returned to their source, the imbalance caused by Sophia's passion will be healed, and the material realm, having served its purpose, will dissolve or be transformed. This is not a vision of apocalypse in the conventional sense, with divine judgment and the punishment of the wicked. It is more like a waking up from a dream, a return to clarity after a period of confusion. The Archons are not destroyed, but their power is revealed as illusory. They are forces of ignorance, and ignorance dissolves in the presence of knowledge. The material world is not annihilated, but seen for what it is, a temporary structure, a stage on which the drama of awakening is played out. Scholars who study the secret book of John often emphasize that it should not be read as a literal account of cosmology or history. The text itself seems aware of its symbolic nature. It uses the language of myth and vision, and it invites the reader to interpret its imagery in a way that speaks to their own experience. The Pleroma, the Archons, Sophia, Yaldabaoth, these are not figures in a literal drama playing out in some distant realm. They are symbols for aspects of reality, both cosmic and psychological, that are difficult to express in ordinary language. From a psychological perspective, the Secret Book of John can be read as a map of the human psyche. The Pleroma represents the integrated self, the wholeness that exists before the fracturing of consciousness. Sophia's fall represents the movement of awareness into complexity and conflict, the birth of the ego and the sense of separate selfhood. Yaldabaoth represents the ego's delusion of omnipotence, the belief that it's the center of reality. The Archons represent the unconscious patterns, the internal voices of judgment, fear, and desire that keep the psyche trapped in narrow, repetitive cycles. The divine spark represents the true self, the core of awareness that is not conditioned by external circumstances. From this perspective, the journey of the soul is the journey of individuation, the process of becoming whole. It is the work of integrating the shadow, of bringing the unconscious into consciousness, of reclaiming the projections that have been placed on the outer world. It is the recognition that the enemy is not outside but inside, and that the battle is not with external powers, but with the illusions that have been internalized. Philosophers have also found in the Secret Book of John echoes of Platonic thought. Plato wrote of a world of eternal forms, perfect and unchanging, and a world of matter, where these forms are imperfectly reflected. He described the soul as originating in the realm of forms and descending into a body, where it forgets its true nature. The philosopher's task for Plato is to remember, to turn the soul's attention away from the shadows on the cave wall and toward the light of truth. The Gnostic vision is in many ways a more dramatic and personalized version of this idea, with the world of forms becoming the pleroma and the descent into matter becoming a cosmic tragedy rather than a natural process. There are also parallels with mystical traditions from other cultures. The idea of the soul as a divine spark trapped in matter appears in Hinduism, where the Atman, the true self, is identical with Brahman, the ultimate reality, but is caught in the cycle of birth and death due to ignorance. The Buddhist teaching of awakening from the illusion of self and the recognition of the unconditioned mind has resonances with Gnostic gnosis. Sufi poets speak of the soul as a bird that has forgotten its home, longing to return to the beloved. These parallels suggest that the questions the Secret Book of John addresses are not unique to one time or place, but are part of the perennial human quest for meaning and liberation. Yet there are also significant differences between Gnosticism and these other traditions. The Gnostic vision is more dualistic, more sharply dividing the spiritual and the material, the good and the ignorant. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the material world, while illusory or impermanent, is not the creation of an evil or ignorant deity. It is part of the play of consciousness, or the result of karma, or the natural unfolding of dependent origination. In Christian mysticism, the material world is the creation of a loving God, and the goal is not to escape it but to see it transfigured, to find the divine presence within it. The Gnostic view is more radical in its rejection of the creator of the material world, more insistent that this world is fundamentally flawed and that the soul must leave it behind. This radical dualism is one reason why Gnostic texts like the Secret Book of John were controversial in the early Christian community. The emerging Orthodox Church taught that God the Father, revealed in Jesus Christ, was the creator of the heavens and the earth, and that creation was good, though marred by human sin. To say that the creator was an ignorant demiurge, that the material world was a prison, and that salvation meant escape from it was to undermine the foundations of the faith as it was coming to be defined. Church fathers like Irenaeus and Tertullian wrote lengthy refutations of Gnostic ideas, arguing that they were dangerous distortions of the gospel. From the perspective of these critics, Gnosticism encouraged a kind of spiritual elitism, dividing humanity into those who had the spark and those who did not, those who could attain gnosis and those who were bound to remain in ignorance. It also seemed to deny the goodness of creation, the reality of the incarnation, and the hope of bodily resurrection. If the body was merely a prison, if matter was evil, then why would God become flesh? Why would the resurrection of the body be a promise of salvation? Yet Gnostic communities did not see themselves as rejecting Christianity, but as understanding it more deeply. They believed that Jesus had given two levels of teaching, a public teaching for the masses and a secret teaching for those who were ready to receive it. The secret book of John was part of that secret teaching, a revelation meant for those who were already questioning, already seeking, already sensing that there was more to the story than what was presented in the emerging Orthodox tradition. In the centuries following the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century, when the Church began to establish a more unified doctrine and structure, Gnostic texts were increasingly marginalized. They were declared heretical, their communities were disbanded, and their writings were destroyed. The texts that were buried at Nag Hammadi were likely hidden to protect them from this suppression, placed in jars and sealed in a cliff face where they would remain undisturbed for 16 centuries. The rediscovery of these texts in the 20th century came at a time when Western culture was undergoing its own crisis of meaning. The certainties of the Enlightenment had been shaken by 2 world wars, by the horrors of totalitarianism, by the recognition of the dark side of progress and reason. People were seeking new ways to understand the human condition, new languages for speaking about the soul and its struggles. The Gnostic texts, with their emphasis on hidden knowledge, their critique of external authority, and their focus on inner transformation, resonated with a culture that was questioning tradition and seeking direct experience. Scholars began to study the texts not as curiosities or heresies, but as serious religious and philosophical documents. They recognized that the Gnostic worldview, while strange to modern ears, was addressing questions that remain urgent. What is the nature of evil? Why is there suffering? What is the relationship between consciousness and matter? How can the individual find meaning in a world that often seems absurd or hostile? The secret book of John offered one set of answers, not the only answers, but answers that had clearly spoken to the needs and experiences of its original readers. In contemporary discussion, the secret book of John and other Gnostic texts are often read in a more metaphorical or psychological way. Few people today would claim to believe literally in the Pleroma, the Archons, or the Demiurge as objective entities existing independently of human consciousness. Instead, these figures are seen as powerful symbols, as ways of articulating truths about the human condition that are difficult to express in more literal language. The Archons, for example, might be understood as the internalized voices of authority and control that limit freedom and awareness. The divine spark might be understood as the capacity for self-reflection, for creativity, for love, for transcendence. This symbolic reading allows the text to speak to people who do not share the cosmological assumptions of the ancient world, but who recognize in the story a mirror of their own experience. Many people feel trapped by circumstances, by social expectations, by economic pressures, by psychological patterns. Many people feel a sense of alienation, a feeling that they are not at home in the world as it is. Many people long for something more, something deeper, something that gives life meaning beyond the daily round of work and consumption. The secret book of John names this longing and offers a framework for understanding it. It suggests that the feeling of alienation is not a sign of personal failure or mental illness, but a clue, a hint that the soul knows something that the conditioned mind has forgotten. It suggests that the systems and structures that dominate modern life, while necessary in some respects, are not ultimate, not divine, and should not be mistaken for reality itself. It suggests that within each person there is a capacity for awareness that transcends the limitations of the ego, a spark of consciousness that is connected to something infinite and eternal. This is not to say that the secret book of John provides easy answers or quick solutions. The path of gnosis, as the text describes it, is demanding. It requires the soul to face uncomfortable truths, to let go of comforting illusions, to venture into the unknown. It requires a willingness to be transformed, to die to the old self and be reborn to the new. It requires patience because the work of awakening is gradual, a process of peeling away layers of conditioning one by one. The text also makes clear that gnosis cannot be given by an external teacher, no matter how wise or enlightened. The Saviour in the secret book of John does not save by doing something for the soul, but by revealing to the soul what it must do for itself. He is a guide, a mirror, a presence that calls forth the inner light. But the soul must respond. It must choose to awaken, to remember, to walk the path. This emphasis on personal responsibility and inner authority is one of the most distinctive features of Gnostic spirituality. At the same time, the text acknowledges that the soul cannot complete this journey alone. It needs help both from the divine realm and from other souls who are on the same path. The figure of the luminous thought, the feminine helper who comes to awaken humanity, suggests that grace is always present, that the soul is never truly abandoned, and the communal nature of early Gnostic groups who read these texts together, discussed them and supported one another in their spiritual practice, suggests that the journey is also a shared one, a collective movement toward healing and wholeness. The question of why the soul came to earth, according to the secret book of John, is ultimately a question about identity and purpose. The soul did not come to earth to be punished, or to prove its worthiness, or to fulfill the demands of a distant deity. It came because it is part of a larger process, a cosmic drama in which the divine is seeking to know itself fully, to integrate all that has been fragmented to bring light into darkness. The soul's experience in the material world, with all its challenges and sufferings, is part of this process. It is not meaningless, but it is also not the final word. The text invites the reader to see their life as a journey of awakening, a movement from unconsciousness to consciousness, from ignorance to knowledge, from exile to homecoming. It invites the reader to question the assumptions that have been imposed by external authorities, to look within for the truth that cannot be found anywhere else. It invites the reader to trust the divine spark, to nurture it, to let it guide the soul back to its origin. In doing so, the secret book of John participates in a long tradition of wisdom literature, texts that are not primarily concerned with doctrine or ritual, but with transformation. They are maps for the inner journey, guides for those who are seeking, companions for the solitary soul. They do not demand belief, but invite exploration. They do not claim to have all the answers, but point toward a mystery that is always present, always available, if one has the eyes to see and the ears to hear. For some readers, the secret book of John will remain an interesting historical artifact, a window into the religious diversity of the ancient world. For others, it will be a source of personal inspiration, a text that speaks to their own experience and offers a language for naming what they have felt but could not express. For still others, it will be a challenge, a provocation to think differently about reality, about the divine, about the nature of the soul. What the text asks of all its readers, however, is that they take seriously the possibility that there is more to existence than what is visible, more to the self than the body and the ego, more to consciousness than the brain and its chemistry. It asks that they consider the possibility that the feeling of being a stranger in the world is not an illusion to be overcome, but a truth to be embraced, a starting point for a deeper inquiry. The secret book of John was written in a time when people were grappling with enormous changes, when old certainties were collapsing and new possibilities were emerging. The Roman Empire was vast and powerful, but also oppressive and alienating. People were searching for meaning in a world that often seemed hostile to their deepest aspirations. They were trying to reconcile different traditions, to make sense of conflicting teachings, to find a way to live with integrity in a complex and often brutal world. In many ways, the challenges they faced are not so different from the challenges faced by people today. The scale and the details have changed, but the fundamental questions remain. How do we live in a world that is shaped by forces beyond our control? How do we preserve our humanity, our compassion, our sense of the sacred in the face of suffering and injustice? How do we navigate between the demands of the material world and the needs of the soul? The secret book of John does not claim to have the final answers to these questions. It is one voice among many, one vision among many. It reflects the particular concerns and the particular insights of a specific community at a specific time. But it also touches on themes that are universal, that resonate across cultures and centuries. It speaks to the longing for wholeness, the desire for truth, the hope for liberation. The text reminds us that human beings have always been seekers, always been questioners, always been dissatisfied with easy answers and conventional wisdom. It reminds us that the spiritual journey is not a recent invention, not a product of modern psychology or New Age spirituality, but an ancient and enduring aspect of human nature. It reminds us that every generation must do the work of awakening for itself, must ask the hard questions, must face the darkness and the light within. This secret book of John also reminds us of the power of narrative. The story it tells of the fall of Sophia, the arrogance of Yaldabaoth, the creation of humanity, the entry of the divine spark into our matter, is not a scientific account or a historical report. It is a myth, a sacred story, a way of organizing experience into a meaningful pattern. Myths are not falsehoods, They are truths that cannot be captured in literal language, truths that speak to the imagination and the heart as much as to the intellect. The value of a myth is not in its factual accuracy, but in its power to illuminate, to inspire, to transform. The Secret Book of John offers a myth of the soul's journey, and for those who resonate with it, this myth can be a source of guidance and comfort. It can provide a framework for understanding the struggles of life, a vocabulary for speaking about the interior journey, a reminder that the soul is not alone in its quest for meaning. At the same time, it is important to approach such texts with discernment. Not every teaching, not every vision, not every myth will be helpful or true for every person. The Secret Book of John presents a particular worldview, one that emphasizes dualism, that sees the material world as fundamentally problematic, that locates salvation in escape and transcendence. This worldview has value, but it also has limitations. Some traditions teach that the material world, while imperfect, is also a manifestation of the divine, that the body is a temple, that the created order is to be honored and cherished. Some traditions emphasize relationship, community, and embodied life as paths to the divine, rather than withdrawal and ascent. Some traditions teach that suffering is not primarily the result of ignorance or cosmic error, but an inherent part of existence that can be met with courage, compassion, and love. The Secret Book of John is one perspective, one lens through which to view the mystery of existence. It should not be taken as the only perspective or as absolute truth. It is an invitation to explore, to consider, to reflect, but also to question and to integrate what is helpful while leaving aside what is not. In the end, the question of why the soul came to earth is not a question that can be answered definitively by any text or teaching. It is a question that each person must answer for themselves, through the living of their life, through the choices they make, through the awareness they cultivate. The Secret Book of John offers one possible answer. The soul came to earth as part of a cosmic process of healing and restoration, to experience matter, to encounter forgetting, and ultimately to awaken to its true nature and return to its source. This answer may resonate with some and not with others, but the deeper value of the text is not in the specific answer it gives, but in the fact that it takes the question seriously. It does not dismiss the feeling of alienation or the longing for something more. It does not tell the soul to be content with the surface of things, to accept the world as it appears, to stop asking why. Instead, it honors the question, it explores the mystery, and it offers a vision of the soul's dignity and destiny that is both humbling and exalting. The soul, according to this text, is not an accident, not a byproduct of chemical processes, not a meaningless spark that will be extinguished at death. It is a fragment of the divine, a bearer of light, a participant in a story that is cosmic in scope. Its journey through the material world is difficult, often painful, marked by confusion and forgetting, but it is also a journey of discovery, of growth, of the development of capacities that can only be forged in the crucible of experience. The soul learns through its struggles. It learns compassion through suffering, strength through challenge, wisdom through error. It learns to distinguish between the true and the false, the real and the illusory, the essential and the superficial. It learns that happiness cannot be found in external things, that security is an illusion, that the ego's demands can never be fully satisfied. And through all this learning, the soul is being prepared for the moment of awakening, the moment when it recognizes itself in the mirror of the divine and remembers who it has always been. This process of awakening is not something that happens once and for all. It is gradual, progressive, involving many stages and many returns to forgetfulness. The soul may have moments of clarity, glimpses of the truth, experiences of profound peace or joy or insight, but these moments are followed by periods of darkness, doubt, and struggle. The path of awakening is not a straight line, but a spiral returning again and again to the same issues at deeper levels. The Secret Book of John acknowledges this difficulty. It does not promise quick or easy salvation. It does not say that knowledge will make all problems disappear, or that the soul will instantly be freed from the constraints of matter. What it does say is that the path is available, that the light is always present, that the soul has the capacity to awaken if it chooses to do so. And it says that this awakening, whenever and however it occurs, is the fulfillment of the soul's deepest purpose, the reason it came to earth in the first place. The text also speaks to the collective dimension of this journey. The souls are not isolated individuals, Each struggling alone in the darkness, they are connected, part of a larger whole, members of a community of seekers. As each soul awakens, it contributes to the awakening of others. The light that one person kindles can help to light the way for those who are still in darkness. The knowledge that one person gains can be shared, can become part of the collective wisdom. The healing that one person experiences can ripple outward, affecting the web of relationships in which all souls are embedded. In this sense, the journey of the soul is both personal and social, both individual and communal. Each person must do their own work, must face their own shadows, must find their own way, but this work is not done in isolation. It is supported by the presence of others, by the teachings that have been passed down, by the community of practice that holds space for transformation, and each person's awakening contributes to the larger project of healing the cosmos, of restoring the balance that was lost, of bringing the scattered fragments of light back into unity. This vision of collective awakening is both inspiring and sobering. It suggests that the problems of the world, suffering, injustice, violence, environmental destruction, are not simply political or economic issues, but spiritual ones. They are symptoms of the collective forgetting, the collective identification with the ego and its drives, and they can only be addressed ultimately through a collective awakening, a shift in consciousness that affects not just individuals but entire cultures and societies. At the same time, this vision can seem overwhelming, even paralyzing. How can one person's awakening make a difference in the face of such vast and entrenched problems? How can inner work address outer conditions? The Secret Book of John does not offer easy answers to these questions, but it suggests that the work of awakening is always worthwhile, always necessary, regardless of the scale of the problems. It suggests that the soul's primary responsibility is to itself, to its own clarity and integrity, and that this responsibility, when taken seriously, naturally leads to compassionate action in the world. The text also reminds us that the Archons, the forces of ignorance and control, are not invincible. They are powerful, but their power is based on illusion, on the soul's forgetfulness. When the soul remembers, when it sees through the illusion, the power of the Archons begins to dissolve. This does not mean that external structures of oppression will immediately collapse, but it does mean that the soul is no longer inwardly enslaved to them. It can act with greater freedom, greater wisdom, greater effectiveness. In this way, the Secret Book of John offers a vision of liberation that is both mystical and practical, both transcendent and immanent. It points toward a reality beyond the material world, a realm of light and wholeness that is the soul's true home. But it also insists that this reality can be accessed here and now, in the midst of embodied life, through the work of awakening and remembering. It is not necessary to die in order to return to the pleroma. The return begins in this life, in this moment, whenever the soul turns its attention inward and recognizes the light that has always been present. The question of why the soul came to earth, then, is ultimately a question about meaning. The soul came to earth because there is something here to learn, something to experience, something to integrate. The material world, for all its limitations and sufferings, is also a realm of extraordinary beauty and diversity. It is a place where consciousness can explore, can create, can relate, can love. And these experiences, painful as they may be, are part of the soul's education, part of its journey toward wholeness. The Secret Book of John does not say that the material world is worthless or that embodied life is to be despised. What it says is that the material world is not ultimate, not final, not the full truth of existence. It is a stage, a classroom, a temporary dwelling, and the soul must learn to live in it without being entirely of it, to participate in it without losing sight of its true nature, to honour the body and its needs while remembering that it is more than the body. This balance is delicate and difficult to maintain. It is easy to fall into one extreme or the other, either becoming so identified with the material world that the spiritual dimension is forgotten, or becoming so focused on transcendence that the opportunities and responsibilities of embodied life are neglected. The Secret Book of John does not provide a detailed ethical code or a set of rules for how to live, but it offers a principle. Remember who you are. Remember that you are a soul, a bearer of light, a fragment of the divine. Let this remembrance guide your choices, your relationships, your actions. This principle can be applied in countless ways depending on the circumstances and needs of each person. For some, it may mean withdrawing from the distractions and demands of the world in order to cultivate inner silence and clarity. For others, it may mean engaging more fully with the world, bringing the light of awareness into the places of darkness and suffering. For some, it may mean study and contemplation. For others, it may mean creative expression or service to others. There is no single path, no single method. The soul must find its own way, guided by its own inner light. What the secret book of John insists on, however, is that the soul cannot find its way by following external authorities blindly, by accepting the dictates of the Archons, by conforming to the expectations of society or the demands of the ego. The soul must learn to think for itself, to question, to discern, to trust its own experience. This is not a rejection of traditional community, but a refusal to let traditional community become a substitute for personal insight. The teachings of the wise can illuminate the path, but they cannot walk it for you. The presence of the community can support the journey, but it cannot make the journey on your behalf. In this emphasis on personal authority and direct experience, the secret book of John is deeply countercultural both in its own time and in ours. It challenges the assumption that truth is something that can be possessed by institutions, codified in doctrines, and transmitted through hierarchies of power. It suggests instead that truth is something that must be discovered, again and again by each individual soul in the depths of its own being. It suggests that the ultimate authority is not outside, but inside, not in the structures of religion or government or culture, but in the divine spark that dwells at the heart of consciousness. This is a radical vision, and it has implications that extend far beyond the realm of personal spirituality. It implies a critique of all forms of external authority that claim to have a monopoly on truth, whether religious, political, or intellectual. It implies a commitment to freedom, to autonomy, to the dignity of the individual soul, and it implies a recognition that the deepest wisdom is not the property of any elite, but is accessible to all who are willing to look within. At the same time, the text does not fall into the trap of individualism or narcissism. The soul's journey is not about self-aggrandizement or the pursuit of personal power. It is about self-knowledge, which is inseparable from knowledge of the divine, and this knowledge, when genuine, leads not to arrogance but to humility, not to isolation but to connection, not to domination but to service. The soul that awakens to its true nature recognizes the same divine spark in all beings and feels a natural compassion and solidarity with them. The secret book of John, then, is a text that invites the reader to participate in a vision of reality that is both ancient and ever new. It is ancient because it draws on themes and images that have been present in human consciousness for millennia. Themes of fall and redemption, exile and return, forgetting and remembering. It is ever new because these themes continue to speak to the lived experience of people in every age, addressing the perennial questions of identity, purpose, and meaning. For those who choose to engage with this text, it can become a companion on the journey, a mirror in which to see the movements of the soul more clearly, a source of encouragement and challenge. It can help to name what has been inchoate, to give form to what has been vague, to articulate what has been felt but not understood. It can provide a framework for integrating experiences that might otherwise seem random or meaningless, showing how they are part of a larger pattern, a deeper story. But it is important to remember that the secret book of John is not an end in itself. It is a means, a tool, a pointer towards something that cannot be fully captured in words. The ultimate goal is not to understand the text, but to undergo the transformation it describes. The ultimate goal is not to believe in the pleroma or the archons, but to awaken to the reality that these symbols represent. The ultimate goal is not to acquire knowledge about the soul, but to know the soul directly, immediately, in the lived experience of presence and awareness. This direct knowledge, this gnosis, is the heart of the Gnostic path. It is not a knowledge that can be given by a teacher or found in a book. It is a knowledge that arises from within, when the soul becomes still enough, clear enough, open enough to perceive its own nature. It is a knowledge that is always available, always present, but that is usually obscured by the noise and activity of the mind, by the demands of the ego, by the conditioning of culture and society. The secret book of John describes a cosmos in which the soul must navigate many obstacles and deceptions in order to reach this knowledge. But it also insists that the soul has everything it needs to make the journey. The divine spark is already present. The inner light is already shining. The path is already illuminated, if only the soul will turn its gaze inward and begin to walk. This turning inward is not a turning away from the world, but a turning toward the source of all life and meaning. It is the discovery of the still point, the center of awareness that is always present beneath the surface of experience. It is the recognition that the soul is not a product of the material world, not a creature of the Archons, but a manifestation of the infinite, a wave on the ocean of being, inseparable from the whole. The journey described in the Secret Book of John is, in the end, a journey home, but it is a home that has never truly been left, a presence that has never truly been absent. The soul has been wandering, yes, lost in forgetfulness, caught in the illusions of matter and time, but the divine has never abandoned the soul, and the soul has never been truly separate from the divine. The journey is a matter of realizing what has always been true, of seeing what has always been present, of awakening to a reality that has been hidden only by the soul's own blindness. This realization, when it comes, is both simple and profound. It is simple because it is just a matter of seeing, of recognizing what is already there. It is profound because it changes everything. The soul that awakens to its true nature does not become something other than what it was. Rather, it becomes fully what it has always been, but had forgotten. It steps into its identity, its power, its purpose. It no longer needs to seek because it has found. It no longer needs to struggle because it rests in the ground of being. It no longer needs to fear because it knows itself as eternal. This is the promise of the Secret Book of John, that the soul, no matter how lost or confused or burdened it may feel, has the capacity to awaken, to remember, to return to its source. This promise is not a guarantee, not a magical solution, not a shortcut around the hard work of transformation, but it is a genuine possibility, a real hope grounded in the nature of consciousness itself. The text asks the reader to trust this possibility, to take the first step on the path, to begin the work of turning inward and listening to the voice of the divine. It asks the reader to question the assumptions that have been taken for granted, to look beneath the surface of things, to seek the truth that lies hidden in plain sight. It asks the reader to have courage, to be willing to face the darkness as well as the light, to undergo the death of the old self in order to be reborn as the new. And it reminds the reader that this work is not done alone. The divine is always present, always supporting, always guiding. The community of souls, past and present, is always available as a source of wisdom and encouragement. The teachers and teachings, the texts and traditions, are always there to illuminate the way. But in the end, the journey is the soul's own. No one can walk it for you. No one can give you the knowledge you seek. You must find it within yourself, in the depths of your own being, in the silence of your own heart. The Secret Book of John ends, in most versions, with the Saviour instructing John to share the revelation with those who are ready to receive it, but to guard it carefully from those who would misuse or misunderstand it. This instruction reflects the esoteric nature of the teaching, the sense that it is not for everyone, not for all times, but for those who are seeking, who are ready, who have the ears to hear. But the text that was once hidden is now available to all. It can be read, studied, contemplated by anyone who is interested. And each reader will bring to it their own questions, their own experiences, their own insights. The text does not prescribe a single interpretation, a single response. It is open, multivalent, inviting exploration and dialogue. In this openness lies both its challenge and its gift. The challenge is that the reader must do the work of interpretation, must wrestle with the symbols and images, must find the meaning that speaks to their own condition. The gift is that the text can speak in different ways to different people, can be a source of insight and inspiration across diverse contexts and circumstances. The Secret Book of John is not the only ancient text that addresses the question of why the soul came to earth. It is part of a rich and varied tradition of wisdom literature, spanning cultures and centuries, each offering its own vision of the human condition and the path to liberation. But it is a particularly vivid and compelling example of this tradition, one that captures the imagination and touches the heart. It reminds us that the question of why we are here is not a modern invention, not a product of existential angst or postmodern uncertainty, but an ancient and enduring aspect of human consciousness. It reminds us that our ancestors, in their own time and in their own way, grappled with the same mysteries that we grapple with today. It reminds us that we are part of a long lineage of seekers, of people who have refused to accept easy answers, who have dared to look beyond the surface of things, who have trusted that there is more to life than what meets the eye. And it invites us to take our place in this lineage, to add our voice to the ongoing conversation, to continue the work of awakening and transformation. It invites us to honour the soul, to listen to its whispers, to follow its guidance. It invites us to trust that the journey, difficult as it may be, is worthwhile, that the destination, elusive as it may seem, is real. The soul came to earth, according to the secret book of John, because it is part of a story that is larger than itself, a cosmic drama of fallen redemption, of forgetting and remembering, of descent and ascent. It came to learn, to grow, to awaken. It came to experience matter, to know limitation, to face the shadow. And it came ultimately to return to its source, carrying with it the wisdom and the compassion that can only be gained through the journey. This is one answer to the question. It is not the only answer, but for those who resonate with it, who see in it a reflection of their own experience, who feel the truth of it in their bones, it can be a source of profound meaning and comfort. It can help to make sense of the struggles and the sufferings, the joys and the sorrows, the questions and the longings that mark the human journey. It can provide a context for understanding the soul's path, a narrative that gives shape and direction to what might otherwise seem chaotic and arbitrary. And even for those who do not fully embrace this vision, who find it too dualistic or too pessimistic or too mythological, the secret book of John can still serve as a reminder of the depth and the complexity of the spiritual life. It can be a provocation to think more deeply, to question more boldly, to trust more fully in the reality of the soul and its capacity for transformation. It can be an invitation to explore the riches of the human spiritual heritage, to discover the many ways that people have sought to understand and to live the mystery of existence. In the end, the question of why the soul came to earth is a question that each person must answer for themselves. The secret book of John offers one possible answer, drawn from the experience and the insight of an ancient community of seekers. It is an answer that has endured, that has been preserved and transmitted, that continues to speak to people today. It is an answer that is both strange and familiar, both challenging and comforting, both ancient and ever new. Whether one accepts this answer or not, the question itself remains. And it is a question worth asking, worth pondering, worth living with. Because in the asking, in the pondering, in the living with, the soul begins to awaken. It begins to remember. It begins to see beyond the surface of things to the deeper reality that lies beneath. And in that seeing, it finds what it has been seeking all along. Not a destination outside itself, but a presence within. Not a goal to be achieved, but a truth to be realized. Not an end to the journey, but a homecoming that has always already happened, waiting only to be recognized.